Hello, everybody, and welcome to What is Spirit, Part 7, Grail Mysteries of Rudolf Steiner. I'm here with Joe Visconti, the award-winning videographer, accomplished pianist, composer, uh, the on the board of the American Shakespeare Society, just a well-rounded individual who also has a lifelong relationship with the work of Rudolf Steiner through the gift of having the mother in which he chose himself to be born to, which, if you can't deal with that, okay, you probably shouldn't be here. We'll be seeing a lot of things you couldn't deal with, and that's okay. Whatever anybody has to do. So this is our 7th episode, and within the esoteric stream, 7 is a very special number. It is a number of culmination. And so that Rudolf Steiner says you can look at events in your life and work with a sevenfold rhythm and come to very specific insights that have a very real relationship to your personal unfoldment of destiny. And so, yeah, we were just on Sunday, had a wonderful conversation, and we thought, well, let's chat some more. And I know you have a conversation scheduled at in 2 hours with Douglas Gabriel. So I'm sure that what we share today will be complementary to that, but coming from a different vantage point. One of us will have a camera, one will be painting a picture, another one will be writing a poem, but it's all about the thing in itself. And so that's kind of the mystery of the Grail. What is it that receives? And it's tied into developing that capacity to receive. And so in a lecture that Rudolf Steiner gave on Parsifal and Lohengrin, he says, and he's referring to the German legends. If you're not familiar, well, it's a nice thing to find out about. But he says, and I quote, "The legends of the Nibelungs and of Siegfried are echoes of the ancient pagan time with its secret doctrines, with its views of the initiation of the old leaders of the people, and we have found Siegfried as such a great initiate of the Teutons. However, Lohengrin and Parsifal are individualities of quite a different type. We enter that time with them when Christianity, a worldview completely new to Central Europe, had spread out and won influence. Now, the whole being of the newly emerging Christianity, with everything that is connected as a result with it, lives in both of these legends, in the Parsifal and in the Lohengrin legends. We want to imagine how the being of medieval European development expresses itself in this legend world at first. We have emphasized 8 days ago that to us, the legends of Siegfried and the Nibelungs point to an ancient prehistoric time in which a kind of natural ties of love connected to single tribes, the single parts of the population. Something like an echo of this time is contained in that which Tacitus, in his Germania, reports when he says that the Germans still revered an old tribal god at whom they looked up at like at a father, with whom they were connected by family ties, which extended to tribal communities. The blood, the natural relationship gave that love. Every single tribe had such a tribal divinity that had a kind of ancestor. This natural love is a result of the blood relationship, resting like a breath on these old times. And just the recollection of these old times and tribal communities of this old love based on blood relationship is expressed in the legend type of the Nibelungs. We've seen that the legend type of the Song of the Nibelungs originated in a time in which the tribal love had already withdrawn. Something else replaced it. greed, everything that is symbolized by the gold, that is connected with egoism and is based on it. The old love, based on blood relationship, was no longer authoritative, but new connections that were based on statutes, contracts, and law. This reversal is reflected in the legend of the Nibelungs. Later on, other aims replaced these old communities, which were based on gold, so to say, on possession and mere warlike knightly bravery, which were out for possessions. Other ideals gradually appeared with Christianity. The inner being of Christianity maybe was nowhere expressed as magnificently and tremendously as in the legends, in which we settle down bit by bit, in which the task of Christianity within Central Europe is represented allegorically in the Lohengrin and Parsifal legends. What did Christianity have as its elixir of life? The absolute equality of all human beings. I know that was long, but it kind of gets right down to the central theme I hope to address today. How are you, Joe?
Good. Very good. And that's the problem in our times. That is not long, but it's long for the sound bites of the media and the sound bites that we all live with, and memes and shortness of ideas, almost like they don't grab a hold of our whole being. We don't delve into absorbing what you just read, let it sink in, wonder, think about it. And so really, again, time is that quality that is an enemy to the general public today, because we don't take the time, we don't have the time to to delve into the meaning of what you just read. This reminds me of something that occurred to me this morning, again, speaking to some friends over coffee at a little social gathering at a place called Sophia's here in West Hartford. And there's no telling who's going to step into the group or just have a cup of coffee and comment. But it was about what you just read. Rudolf Steiner gives that 100 years or so ago, probably more than 100 now. What was the world like when we were kids? I'm 65. You're a couple of years older. When we were young, I was talking to my cousin who's 12 years younger than me, telling her about her youth. And when her dad was getting married, my uncle, and before she was born, and I was trying to explain to her, she's 50 years old, about the time of the 60s and what it was like and what her dad went through and her mom. But the time element, I was trying to explain how people thought and what we thought about, what we didn't know, what was a group mentality of the world in the 60s. In the 70s, media has brought that bigger, so we know kind of everything is out in the public, but it wasn't. So let's go back 100 years, let's go back 1,000 years. What were the cultures like in these communities? What did they cherish? What impressed them, and how did they absorb and look at these things of life and the legends as they were being told to them, word to mouth, in storytelling? And what did that do in their time? I could hardly convince my cousin of 50 years old what it was like in 1967 at her dad's wedding. How could you go back 100 or 1,000 years for people to comprehend? These were different times, and the spirit of the times uh, impressed on people things differently. Although we can talk about the same issues, food, survival, war, everything had different meanings, and all these different centuries and epics. And with that, I'd love to say that these legends live on. There's a power in them and a truth in them. And hopefully mankind can get back, or at least education, to bring these legends and these stories and these histories to our youth and education where they have been stripped away.
Yes, absolutely. And it's interesting because today is what, October 26th, which is an interesting day. If you just go over to Wikipedia, you can look up October 26th. And today was the day in 1774, of the adjournment of the First Continental Congress, which is interesting because that's so apropos given the circumstances of today. But also in 1860, it was the unification of Italy, the expedition of the Thousand Ends, when Giuseppe Garibaldi presented his conquest to King Victor Emmanuel of Sardinia. So you have that in juxtaposition to it. But yet, if you go into more recent future, uh, in 2001, the United States passed the USA Patriot Act into law. And so you have this whole uh, image of the challenge of sovereignty and this whole idea of that there's a privileged class of people and that they get to have more decision-making power than anybody else, which is directly in opposition to the spirit of what we're talking about here. And so, as I want to continue with this a little bit here. So Rudolf Steiner continues. What did Christianity have as its elixir of life? The absolute equality of all human beings. One felt Christianity that way, at least at that time. One felt freedom, equality before the highest that the human being can imagine as the jewel, as the real mission of Christianity. The ancestors of the Teutons were proud of the name of their ancestors, of the name of a tribe or of a family name. They referred to it if they wanted to assign value to themselves in the world. They referred to the law, to titles and names in the time, which had superseded the family love. Now both should no longer be valid. But simply put, one felt intrinsically in their core that the human being had to be important. The human being without title, without name, was the Christian ideal. Something great was said with it. The Lohengrin and the Parzival legends express this. And so you have this whole image of the christening of the individual human being into the world of sovereignty, because if you go back in the feudal system, you see that basically if the serfs worked the land and if the serfs took off, well, the Lord would send the sheriff after him and haul him back there and stick him back where he was supposed to be. I mean, people don't understand that. You know, if you go back to just as recent as the 1800s, the majority of the people lived on $1 or less a day by today's economic standards. So mankind has been able to develop a working relationship with their world that comes out of this development, specifically the one in the story of Lohengrin, because that's tied into the whole idea of town founding, when people would get off of the feudal land relationship with the lords and move into the cities. And then they could work as independent individuals, have whatever business they may be into, or a trade, or what have you. So you have this metamorphosis that takes place in time. And all these things are important in the context of that, as Rudolf Steiner said, and I keep repeating because it's so important, when he talked about the ascension and the resurrection, he said, Christ, through the deed of Golgotha, gave time back to mankind.
That's so true. And again, I'll repeat something as I hear you read this. Time and the spirit of time. We can look towards music and see that the spirit of time in music in the 50s, in the 40s, the music of the time, we all kind of know instinctively that music is spiritual. It's something about it invisible. The genres change. It morphs into. I was just watching a piece of Elvis speaking in 1960 about whether rock and roll will die. You know, it's about to die. He goes, well, I'm not sure, but it's definitely changing, and it's going to get better and progress. And I hope I hope it lasts. But here's a young man kind of jumping into rock and roll of the spiritual music, but the spirit of time. and we talk about time, we talk about the spirit of Christianity moving across Europe. Every one of these movements, almost like a musical movement, is occurring, and the average person definitely can feel it. They may not know where to put it, where it belongs, or where it comes from, but we definitely feel today, Tuesday, you wake up, Wednesday, you wake up, Thursday, you wake up, and you're like, it feels different today. And you're, what day is it? What's the month? You look at the weather, but we all sense and feel these time elements. And in our time, we're so rushed to not be able to stop. And they say, smell the roses. But the spirit is always trying to say something of the time and deliver a message. And if mankind would just be able to still themselves in like a moment of time, there's so much that could be gathered that we're missing. It's like they say, the spirit is willing and the flesh is not weak. It's not paying attention. You're muted right now, my friend. There you go.
And so you get into this whole artistic impulse that is able to bring something to your creation. And there's a quote that I ran across recently. I'd forgotten about. I had in my computer. Jimi Hendrix of all people, and he says, "Don't use your brain to play it. Let your feelings guide your fingers." And so you see that there's that whole tactical and emotional relationship to the realm of music that was unique with him and with other people. And it I mean, we could talk about that for hours, but I don't want to get caught up in it too much. But you can go into other aspects of it, like, for example, with the works of Beethoven, of which Anastasia Hupman has just incredible fluid capacity to be able to convey the depth of sensitivity that's involved in interpreting his works, but she has the power to pull that off. Whereas you'll see like Valentina Igoshina, whose her central focus is Friedrich Chopin, and she has a more kind of delicate approach. And so, you know, like I prefer listening to her interpret Chopin, whereas Anastasia Hupman for the Beethoven pieces, and that there's this subtle character. And it's interesting because there was this interview of Valentina Igoshina talking about her music, and she's, you know, an award-winning, just absolutely marvelous pianist. And they wanted her to talk about Chopin, and she says that, and I'm paraphrasing, but she says it's difficult. It's like talking about members of my family. You know, I find it difficult to talk about Chopin. He's inside of me. It's like, so she gets something that's intangible about her personal relationship to Chopin and trying to enter into the music through that doorway. What she's really, to me, what it says is she's coming into relationship with the supersensible beings that were behind the inspiration of that work to Friedrich Chopin, is more the way one would look at it from the view of spiritual science or the esoteric Christian impulse. And so it's that whole idea that the arts can serve as a bridge into the supersensible worlds. And so that's why Rudolf Steiner was had such an emphasis on the arts, whether it be painting or the eurythmy, a form of dance-like movement that he created, or in the other arts, architecture, the building of the Gratianums, painting, and all the various techniques of leisure and watercolors, and on, all the way down to basket weaving and making dolls for children. So this whole idea of bringing that human element into the world around us is such a vital way of relating to the world. And so when you get into your sensitivities, it can fortify you. It can give you strength so that you have more capacity to be able to maintain one's balance in this world of oftentimes contrary forces.
Mr. Segway, you just said strength, and I'm making some notes here because I have to make notes now for all those listening or watching. It's amazing what pops up through spirit because this is what is spirit. It's a communication. Something's being delivered. Something's happening. It's a communication, and especially in the Middle Ages when the arts had to take over. I'll let John talk about that in a minute and why we had to go through the artistic times. But as a contractor growing up as a young man, I remember people are getting tired. The guys on the crews are getting tired, whether a roof on the pouring concrete. And we would put music on the radio, whatever the proper music in the decades we lived. And all of a sudden, everyone was infused with energy and strength. The guys would sing, we'd start moving and hustling. It lifted your spirits when your body was fatigued more. It was not the body, we realized in the moment. It was our spirit. It was our commitment. It was our energy level. Our psychology got weakened. And the song and the message and the happiness or the rock, whatever it was, we all started getting into it to get over this hump that we had psychologically, because the doldrums of work that's redundant can really wear you down. If you walk in your house and you turn the radio on, or Beethoven, I don't care what you play, you look at the house, look at the plants, the house is not the same space. The space is being changed. You're talking about time and space. The spirit is coming in and changing this space, whether it's a demonic spirit of rap or something else. There's definitely a change in the space. Our being is sensitive to that, and we can actually feel that. Rhythm is another thing that happens. To get into, when you're working, you get into rhythm. When you're listening and dancing, you get into rhythm. This goes all the way back to your tribes in Africa and way back in our history, how the rhythm of the earth, the movement, the spirit is there. It manifests in so many forms, whether it's color, art, and it is life-giving. Most importantly, it's because it affects our psychology. And painting, not so much, and sculpture in our time is something that is revered, but the spirit of the times, in the moment, you can alter your own. You can say, I'm really feeling depressed. I'm really feeling anxiety. And if, especially in groups, it works better because the group can get out of it quicker than an individual. But it is a communication, and it's coming. And we all know it. Look at a song, She Loves You, Yeah, 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 or Help, I Need Somebody, the Beatles, or Billy Joel, or anything. What is it saying? And when we sing it and we hear it, what is it doing to us psychologically? And how can the psychology correct itself so all of a sudden blood is flowing, energy, breathing, life, effect, and we're changing? So the arts definitely are life-giving, and the spirit of the time and the spirit of each art form is so unique in who receives it.
Yes. And so to give some more images in that same Parsifal and Lohengrin lecture, Rudolf Steiner says, King Arthur, about whom one says that he withdrew with his round table into Wales and lived there, was referring to nothing else than the learned lore of those sages who formed a spiritual center, a kind of spiritual monarchy. One felt that this spiritual center, I would like to say of original scholars, with his chosen 12 companions, was there. This had good reasons. Thus, one tells that King Arthur was nothing else than the successor of that directing scholar of the old Celtic priests in Wales. With it, we immediately recognize that there was something in Europe that in spiritual science we might call a Grand Lodge. Let us now realize this concept of a Grand Lodge. You know that we think seriously of development, that humanity develops, that humanity ascends higher and higher, and that every single human being can ascend the path of knowledge up to those stages where he himself beholds the spiritual worlds, whereby the primal ground of being behind the world manifests to him.
The world behind the world.
Yes, so there's this whole idea of aspiration and being able to receive inspiration to fulfill your aspirations. And so you see that in the comments by the pianist I just referenced, that there's this whole reverent attitude towards one's path in life. And that's what made her so reticent about discussing her personal inner relationship to Chopin, because it was, for her, it was her spiritual path was to try and achieve perfection through art and craft her soul in the process. And so that's what we're all doing here. We're all like in the building arts. Joe's also a builder, and in the building arts, they have the whole symbolism of the rough ashlar, and the rough ashlar is that which ends up being finished. And so there's that image of the stone, like in scripture, you have the stone the builders rejected. And what is that? And that's on one level an image of Jesus Christ, that he was the stone the builders rejected, because within the workings of the divine spiritual powers that Christ is the leader of, you'll find that there's this mood of waiting. They're waiting for you to do something. Are you going to do it? Are you going to do it? It's not like you're waiting for them to do it to you. That's not what it is. It has to do with what you're offering up to the divine spiritual powers that have given you this arena of activity. See, and so just during the course of the day, if you could, say grace when you eat your meals and consecrate your mind before you go to sleep, little things like that can serve as a bridge, a rainbow bridge, so to speak, into your relationship to this higher realm of what in other episodes I've called Kyrios. The Kyrios is, they translate as Lord. Rudolf Steiner indicates that really it's pertaining to that whole idea that you received your ego, the core of your being. That's not your astral body. It's not your etheric body. It's not your physical body. It's something completely separate from all that, in that it was given to you as a gift out of the substance, the divine spiritual powers through the spirits, the exousiae, the spirits of form, of which Jehovah is one. And with Christ working through that capacity to give you that divine part of you, and of which your personality is the least part. I mean, it's really kind of silly when somebody becomes so proud of that, when you think about, well, there's deeper levels of you that are keeping your heart beating and your gland system functioning properly, and this whole interplay between the divine spiritual powers and your human vehicle, so that the higher world is ever present. It's just a question of, are we conscious of it? Are we thankful of it? The more that we can kind of anoint our understanding of the world, the greater that it can provide us this grace of blessing that can give us the fortification to be able to move smoothly through this world of contrary forces. Speaking of contrary forces, I've gotten more spam phone calls today than I have all week. So there's your contrary forces. So you have these spirits of hindrance that can enter into your life, and you can brush them aside easily through consecration.
Getting back to King Arthur in Wales, we think about the spirit of the Grail Knights, the unification, and if you look at it this way, sometimes things in our time are delivered from history, and we all think the same thing. Oh, the Holy Grail or the Knights Templar Excalibur, all working together, serving who does the Grail serve? The Excalibur, the beauty, I hate to say it like this, but the beauty of war. It's a complete art form. The rhythm, the intensity, the battles, the scenes, the up and down, killing, retreat. You take a look at the musical elements that are in war or in the struggle for the Grail. The crescendo, how a piece of work, if it's Beethoven or Chopin or whoever, how it's every element of it is a battle scene. It is an experience, your daily life, getting up and going to work today, and all the rhythms and struggles from the attacks in your mind of spam phone calls or negative thoughts, and how you triumph over that adversity, you bear it. You can see this lodge, you can see this Excalibur, and you can see this Grail always appearing all day long, every day, everywhere. It's not something that was just there in the holiness of that moment, but it's something that is tied to each man, each woman, and we go through these struggles. But looking at the art forms in war, which no one wants war, no one wants death, but looking at it from this perspective artistically, it's there's many secrets in these battles and in the Grail mysteries that have meanings that are different than what we would get from Disney or from something we watched or read a book when we were young about King Arthur.
Yes. And to continue forming this image, this imagination, Rudolf Steiner, later on in the same lecture, says, according to a natural principle, we find 12 different forces of the spirit. I have said about Goethe that he himself talks about such a secret brotherhood that he considers as Rosicrucians. One spoke of such a grand white lodge in the Middle Ages. From this, the strands went out which controlled life. One recognized as the one who directed all that as King Arthur, who lived concealed in Wales. Around him were his knights, who were indeed no longer at the height of the priests of the old Celtic time, for whom the time of love had transformed into a time of egoism when one attempted to conquer countries with the sword in hand. However, they were still under the guidance of the White Lodge. Indeed, the question immediately suggests itself. If there are such lodges, even also today, why do they not appear? I have said often enough that it depends not only on the fact that somebody appears, but also on the fact that he can be recognized. Today also, Jesus would probably not be recognized. It's hard to recognize a sage within his time. It's just that which theosophy or spiritual science wants to bring again to humanity. If it finds its way, one understands such a thing as the Round Table of King Arthur, as the directing White Lodge. And so you have this whole idea that there's this participation of the divine in the administration of the affairs of the world, that which is being severed today in secular, secular materialism. It's a tragic episode, and but Rudolf Steiner was very clear. He says, just go out there and tell the truth, and let people do with it what they will or not. And you can't be attached to that. You're going to be able to get the kind of results that you would hope to achieve, and so it's all okay. It's that you're doing it. That's the value. And even if you're just sharing something or holding a door open for a little old lady at the store. I mean, there's these little things that we can do that connect us to our world that can be based on love, because Rudolf Steiner makes the point that as we evolve, we'll come to the realization of the image of the Madonna and child, and that's the mother holding the baby, and that there's that whole idea of it's that force of the heart, that's that 12-fold chakra of the heart, that is the center in which this comes into being, and through taking that warmth of the heart and using that to bathe the high centers in the head, that you develop a more intimate relationship with that which we're referring to. And so in understanding this idea, there's that whole idea, there's the Arthurians knights, but then there's also the Knights of the Holy Grail. They're two separate streams that come together in the 9th century. And so you have that coming out of the pagan Celtic stream, the King Arthur stream, meeting that stream coming from the east and carrying that inner mystery of Joseph of Arimathea and Mary Magdalene and the two Johns and the whole, because remember, I've spoken on other times that in the Celtic mystery centers in Hibernia in Ireland, that they were aware of the mystery of Golgotha while it was taking place. And so it shifted from the ancient world in being a cosmic event into being a historical event. It became something through Christianity that was shared to the world as a historic event, actual physical manifestation of that cosmic longing that they were in touch with in the ancient mysteries in Ireland, that Rudolf Steiner referred to as the great mysteries, that he talks about in the lecture cycle. Oh, my old faded copy here, Mystery Knowledge and Mystery Centers. But that's been reprinted and there's paperback edition available and whatnot. But that goes perfectly hand in glove with the Wonders of the World lecture cycle I make frequent reference to. One can help you understand the other.
Right, with the wonders of the world and the Greek mysteries. They're not mysteries, but they're myths, and overlaid with the legends. People may ask, why does it have to be this way? If you walked in a room and you knew nothing about any of this, and you're just a regular person with a higher education, and you'd say, I've heard some of these words. Why does it have to be like this? If what you say is true, if what you say has any bearing on anything, why did people gather together in those myths and mysteries? What does it have to do with anything in our mechanical time where everything is measure, number, and weight? What does it have to do? Why did they believe these things? What did those things have to do with their life and their consciousness, their awareness, their quality of life, and the reasons for them to live in those ancient societies, whether it was in Atlantis or in Greece or in Wales 1,000 years ago? Why were these just pagans that believed in something because they needed their leaders needed to give them a story? Why does this, John? I'm asking you. I'm not giving an answer to this one. Why do these things? Why do they happen? And to a layman who may not be able to understand all the depths of these things we discuss, but they would ask why.
It's important to realize when one studies spiritual science, which is in excess of 6,700 lectures and 50 published books and articles, so it's quite a task. It's the most difficult study that I know of, and the largest body of work by a single individual. And so trying to give somebody like an easy way. It's just a question of quickening, really, because I, in the last few days, I've been in contact with a couple different people who have come quite far in just quite a short amount of time because they had the wish to be able to they had what you're talking about because they're on the quest. If you're not looking,
There you go.
it's of no value for you, really. You don't think it's important, you go do something else. Or you read a Steiner book and you think because you start to fall asleep that it's because it's boring. No, it's because it's like taking you across the threshold into the spiritual world. It's not what you think. But I want to add some more. So that Rudolf Steiner continues. This was the one, Arthur. The other is the castle of the Holy Grail. Only by way of a hint can we speak of it. One says that the Holy Grail is the chalice in which Christ Jesus with his disciples took the Last Supper, the wine, and in which his blood was collected. Then the lance was also brought to Europe, by which the side of Jesus was pierced. It is said the chalice of the Holy Grail is on Mont Sauvage, or Mons Salvationis, the mountain of salvation, where a holy castle was built. Generally, the Holy Grail has the capacity to give it everlasting youth, the force of everlasting life to somebody who is familiar with its miracles, who lives with its Son of Grace. Again, these are 12, but are Christian spiritual knights now. The old Templars are guardians of the Holy Grail, and they use the forces which they receive from this guardianship to pour out the spiritual knighthood of the heart, of the inner life over Europe. Thus, one countered the White Lodge of the worldly knighthead that moved to Wales with the spiritual knighthead in the castle of the Holy Grail, which is placed on the Spanish mountain of Mont Sauvage. And so you have this idea of these two different facets of the Christian mystery coming together in the 9th century with Parsifal. And it's just remarkable when one dips into the studies of Walter Johannes Stein in his book, World History in the Light of the Holy Grail, where he in depth explores some of those concepts. But I'm just digging in here for something that I just received that is, it very much ties into what we're discussing here, because as we approach these things, that they're basically transformative in nature. And so what that means is they serve as a leaven by which you can notice things. Like here, a gentleman named Lee sent me this morning, and thank you for your contribution, Lee. Very generous, but he says, thanks for responding to me. My question was about the feeling of goosebumps / chills that one sometimes experiences. For example, when reading certain things in your book, I would get this feeling. Is there any esoteric view on what that experience or phenomena is? And so, fortunately, when dealing with someone like Rudolf Steiner, if you have a question like that, you can look it up and realize that, yes, he does talk about that. I sent him the lecture to where he addresses the concept of goosebumps to spiritual development. So you see that there's, all you have to do is seek and you shall find. It's that kind of a thing, because once you spend enough time, you start to wonder, is there anything that he didn't say something about? Even if he didn't reach it directly, he manages to embrace the overlighting idea that's relevant to the scenario and gives you, it's like being given tools. It's what Rudolf Steiner referred to as the Christ language. Because if you want to enter into this relationship with time, an anointed relationship, so to speak, because when you consider things in terms of time, then on that level, you're connected to all your previous incarnations. By the way, I don't know if you knew that, but that's that's a profound resource. And Rudolf Steiner said many people are far more advanced than they even realize because they haven't manifested things that they've accomplished in previous incarnations.
That brings me to leaven, and that also brings me to making wine. We talked about this last time. The leaven you just spoke about. What is the leaven? What is it that raises consciousness? The nerve endings when they start to expand because you hear something, you're moved by music or a truth, beauty, an act of love. What occurs to you with this positive thinking and positive feeling that you're getting? What is that leaven that rises, makes us more? I used to make wine years ago before I got into politics, but every fall I'm busy with politics and not making wine, but crushing the grapes and watching the fermentation of the juice from the crushed grapes. It's like the bread that has to be broken, the grape has to be crushed, work of human hands. What's going on in each of us all the time, perpetually, in the mass, in our daily lives with leaven, and how does consciousness and spiritual involvement in our lives, which is occurring, but once we start to become conscious of it, which Rudolf Steiner gives so many pointers to and gives us directions, and if we're interested, as you said, and we want to be in a search of the Grail, what is it that once we start that gives us this sustenance to continue, and once you start, what's occurring to your being because of this information? Or if it's not in the old days, 1,000 years ago, 500 years ago, what did they receive from these truths and from the Grail and the search for the Grail over time?
Yes, and that whole idea of the leaven, that's hinted at by the Comedy Saint Germain in the poem that I shared in previous episode. Where is alchemical poem. It's this whole idea. The leaven is very much tied into that whole idea that there's a transformation that takes place as a result of engaging oneself in particular actions, with a particular mood of soul and frame of mind that is conducive towards striving toward a result. It's that idea that you're on a quest, that you're seeking, but in order to accomplish this quest, don't kid yourself, because like T.S. Eliot in The Wasteland, his Grail poem, The Wasteland, Parsifal has to cross that wasteland where he has that feeling that he's alienated from this divine spiritual nourishment. But why does that happen? Well, when he first goes to the Grail castle, what happens? He finds the king there's laying down wounded, but he doesn't say anything because previously he'd been given the advice, not to be too inquisitive and not ask questions and just speak when spoken to, kind of thing, right? And so he goes there and he doesn't ask the Grail question. He doesn't say, what is the Grail, and he doesn't say of the king, what ails you, so that he's become too self-involved to be able to have that relationship to these things. And so in this poem,
And
Saint Germain says, curious stater of the whole of nature, I have known the great all, its principle and its end. I have seen gold in its power deep within the mine. I have seized its material and surprised its leaven. I explain by what art the soul within the mother's womb makes its home, carries it out, and as a grape seed placed against a grain of wheat under the humid earth, the one plant, the other vine, are the bread and wine. Nothing was, God willed, and nothing became something. In my doubting, I sought out that on which the universe is poised. Nothing appeared to sustain the equilibrium or to serve as a support. Finally, with the weights of praise and of blame, I weighed the eternal. It called my soul. I died. I adored. I knew nothing more. So there's a power
Yeah.
in that poem that, to me, it's this just transcendental humility that he's expressing there. That he bows before the omnipotence and omnipresence of the absolute.
And Levin, he says it in the poem, a woman in the womb, when she's pregnant, her belly swells, the flesh is increasing. If you're making bread and you make some dough and you watch it rise, you're seeing this activity of rising, elevating, profiting, prosperity, growth, and the power to question. And the quest is really a power to question. And think about this: what is the prosecutor in a courtroom doing? He's seeking truth. And he's questioning, and the activation of the process with the judge and the defense attorney on any case for any reason is seeking to see what happened and what's the truth, what's the reality, what's the responsibility. But once that process, many people don't want to be subpoenaed, they don't want to answer questions, because that process opens up something like alchemy within ourselves. And once it's open with the proper procedures and laws and reality for anything and any quest, that whole judge, jury, prosecutor, defense attorney quest for the truth is evident. We see it in our society is so litigious that we see this everywhere, but really inside of each of us, when we try to find something out, or we're curious and we want to know or get an answer, or why is this happening to me in my karma or in my family, in my life, or how do I get over this, or how do this, the hows, the whys, they're all parts of the quest. And so there's the holy quest, but these processes again are activated in our daily lives, and you can see them manifest everywhere.
Yeah, so it's that's, I guess, the point I'm trying to make, and we're trying to make, is that there's power there, but it's greater than you, and so that's why there's so much reverence and humility that must needs meet the task at hand. So that you have to be able to realize that it's not a selfish power, and that's the difficult thing for many people to get to, myself included. So that, but it gives you courage. And again, going back to the quotation that I frequently share, because people have commented so positively about how it's a tool of centering. He says, we must eradicate from the soul all fear and terror of what comes towards us out of the future. We must acquire serenity in all feelings and sensations about the future. We must look forward with absolute equanimity to everything that may come. And we must think only that whatever comes is given to us by a world-directive full of wisdom. It is part of what we must learn in this age, namely, to live out of pure trust, without any security in existence. Trust in the ever-present help of the spiritual world. Truly, nothing else will do if our courage is not to fail us. Let us seek the awakening from within ourselves every morning and evening, end quote. And so you have that through commitment. As Goethe says, first commit and the world will rise to help you. And so you have this whole idea that there's a connection. You're connecting with something but that's something that's real. If you can't find it in yourself to see it as real, then at least a healthy suspension of disbelief. is required. And then, you can wait and see what happens after you are capable of being humble and being reverent.
And you can see this practical, because I like to think of this, and I do, just from my building trade experience, my entire youth and middle age. You could see that when you have an idea to go do a task, for me, it was more construction related and tools, equipment, men working together. Once you go with this idea that you have to do something and you through your experience how to do this task, you notice, like Goethe says, make a commitment in the world. Well, when that world does manifest, it's very odd. Once you start maybe setting up the ladders, maybe unloading the truck, maybe getting material, where you stage it, where workers come, the time of day, you'll notice that all these things, I've looked over this year after a hard day's work with a crew where you're exhausted, but how many things were occurring during the day? Oh, that didn't seem that hard. Well, that was much more hard than I thought. That was all your assumptions of your mind. And then you notice that there's always something in this task. You can feel a presence of something working with the group and with the tools and the equipment. I'm sure other callings in life will show people other things, whatever they're doing in an office or whatever, just how there's something invisible, this invisible thinking, this invisible hand, if you don't want to call it God, activity is occurring with all of your consciousness and mind and hands and procedures and experience. There's something else always present in the process, always present. And if you can use second sight or just use a higher surveillance part of your mind, which I like to do when I'm doing any task, I keep this supervisory surveillance overlooking what I'm doing, and I let it peek into my own mind going, wow, look at this. Keep track of that. Wow, look at that. While I'm operating, doing what I'm doing at this regular conscious level, if we notice and we're really quick to see that there is help in your mundane activities. And this is the problem with spiritual science or anything to do with spirit and soul, is that somehow it goes off into the ethers, into the outer space, and it loses its connection to the practical activity of chiseling the foot on the marble statue in the Vatican, or something that is earthbound and practical. We get lured and tempted by Lucifer to think it's somewhere else. It's something else, when the mystery and the beauty and help and wonder is all right here, right in front of us, and the most simple task. And that is what Jesus Christ represents in each task, each thing he does. It's so simple.
Yes, that's akin to what Rudolf Steiner says in Wonders of the World, Ordeals of the Soul, Revelations of the Spirit. That volume I keep referring to over and over again. It was brought into the English translation through the efforts of Owen Barfield and this woman. But it included in there, he talks about that concept of how foreign it would be to the ancient world in the way we look at things and think that at specific points in our life, the divine spiritual world has intervened. And it's like something like they were gone and then they came in and then they left. When the ancients would know that it was always there. It's just that you weren't turning your attention to it.
Right.
And that's when you can get into the minutia like he's talking about. You can make pounding a nail into a board a transcendental
Exactly. Yeah.
Seriously, you
Yeah.
can, and so you kind of it gives you a step up and looking at like the builders of the great cathedrals across Europe, for example, because they're by and large anonymous. Or if there is an artisan that signed it, they usually sign it way up, up on the roof. It's so and so did this.
Yeah.
so that there's this whole idea of it's a service that you're providing for that which it represents, the divine spiritual mission, so to speak. And so, well, this is wonderful talking to you. It always is, We were having such a good conversation the other day. We said, "Well, let's go back on and we'll talk some more about it." But don't forget to click like and share this with whomever you think might be appropriate. I have 2 books. The first one this one here is being reprinted, 640 pages, The Arcana of the Grail Angels. That was the book that gentleman was referring to, where he was getting goosebumps. So I think that's interesting. Well, I got goosebumps writing it, so there. But it's the spiritual science of the Holy Blood and of the Holy Grail, a study developed out of the work of Rudolf Steiner of the underground streams of esoteric Christianity, which flowed from the Brotherhood of the Holy Grail to the Order of the Knights Templar and the True Rosicrucian Order, with a foreword by my greatest student and greatest teacher, Douglas Gabriel, my best buddy, and loaded with diagrams pertaining to the spiritual science of Rudolf Steiner. If you want to get into the cosmosophy, you might call it, the star wisdom and the planetary mysteries and all of it, which is so important in understanding the interaction of the 7 with the 12 and so on. In my second volume, The Arcana of Light on the Path, where I read the poem by Comte de Saint-Germain that I translated out of French, but the whole series of diagrams are in this book. This book is still available, but I also created a great many more. So there's a whole continuation of the thematic representation of spiritual science, and gives you meditative tools, so to speak, to be able to contemplate these things more deeply as you go through this mystery of time. The Arcana of Light on the Path is available on eBay here in the continental US, or you can contact me by direct message on Facebook or through the academia link below. You can also contact me through that if you're outside the US. And also, I want to thank that this podcast has been made possible by the generous support of Tyler and Douglas and Vadim and Vivian and Lee and Tim and Neil and Paula and Ray and Whitney, James and Marilyn, Fred, Ishtar, Anil, Beth, Hannah, Russell, Drewman, Rick, Mark, and Maud. These are just people that have either bought my book or over a great span of time has somehow contributed to this little Grail feast that we're trying to have here and the other podcasts. Fortunately, I've been punctual on every one of them, over a couple hundred of them now, which is, if I've accomplished anything, at least I was able to do that. But I want to thank you all for coming here to be with us and see if Joe has something that can kind of put a bow on this.
I do. It just came to me while I was talking. I wrote it down. I was going to use it for the next show, but I'll leave you with your show with this. You know how these things are. We get these intuitions. And this is the one I have. We were speaking about the constellations, Cosmosophia. And here's my quote. I'm going to own this quote. The universe is pregnant. She is expanding. And I won't go negative. I'll just say that. I'm not going to put the little political spin on what's happening on our world and our time, but it is pregnant. We know, science even knows that it's expanding. Stars are born, and it's a living thing. It's a living world. That, and much of it is not connected with what we would consider biological organisms of our Earth sphere, but it's expanding no less. And life, spiritual life, is not always connected with biology of the human being within our firmament here in the planet Earth, but life no less. She's alive. She's expanding. The world is expanding. The universe is expanding, and our consciousness, all of ours, are expanding in these times. What we do with it, how we direct it, and what we look to question in our own personal quest for the Grail is up to us.
Yes. And just to put a little top on it, Rudolf Steiner made reference, and I paraphrase here so I don't have to look it up, but he said, imagine those that look up at the sky and see the stars and see them as just burning gas, and in contrary to that, when you approach it from spiritual science, you see them as colonies of beings. And so with that, I bid you all adieu, and thank you so much, Joe, and thank you everybody for showing up.